The silver paper crown was still on the prep counter, right next to the little vanilla cake I'd baked myself. Half-melted candle still leaning sideways, untouched. The table by the front window had been reserved under my son's name, but I was the one who sat there for hours, waiting. The waitress finally whispered what no mother wants to hear. He'd canceled the dinner. I just nodded, though something inside me folded. I didn't cry. I only sat there, in the restaurant I built, unseen on my own birthday. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. I live in a small town just outside of Des Moines. Nothing fancy, just a quiet stretch of road where people still wave to each other from their porches. My house sits 4 blocks away from the restaurant. It's the same house my husband, Ernest, brought me to after our wedding, back when linoleum floors were all the rage and television had just turned to color. I'm 78 now. The mirror reminds me daily, with my silver bun and soft lines like folds in parchment. My knees complain when it rains, and the stairs feel steeper every year, but I still rise at dawn. Habit, mostly. My hands remember the rhythm of work, chopping, stirring, setting tables. That restaurant, E&M's Table, was our dream. E for Ernest. M for me, Margaret. We opened it in 1976. We served meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and the kind of pie that made folks stay longer just to talk. Ernest passed in '94, and for a time, I didn't know if I'd keep it going, but the regulars kept showing up, and so did I. My son Richard was 16 then, a quiet, clever boy. He used to help out with deliveries, stacking boxes twice his weight. When he laughed, it echoed across the tiled floors. I remember thinking, he'll take over one day. He'll carry this forward. He didn't. He went off to college, got a job in tech somewhere, married a girl named Dana who rarely smiled and never ate more than half her salad. They moved to the city. I only saw them for holidays, and even then, they'd slip away early. Busy week ahead, they'd say, their coats already on. Still, every year, for my birthday, they came to the restaurant. It was tradition. I would pretend not to notice the way Dana scrolled her phone during dinner, or how Richard would answer work calls from the booth. I just focused on the small things, my granddaughter Ellie's shy giggles, the way the candlelight warmed our faces. I held on to those. This year, I felt the ache of absence early. No calls, no confirmation. Just an email from Richard a week before. Dinner's booked, 6 p.m. See you there. No mention of which place, only the time. But I knew. It had always been my restaurant. That was the unspoken rhythm of our family. I would cook, they would gather, I would smile, even when my back hurt, even when the table felt emptier than the year before. I spent that morning preparing. The staff offered to handle everything, but I insisted on baking the cake myself. Vanilla bean with raspberry filling, Ellie's favorite. I trimmed the edges, dusted it with sugar, and even found an old paper crown I'd once used for a kid's birthday party. I placed it on the prep counter, just for fun. A silly tradition, perhaps, but one that made me feel seen, at least by myself. By 5:30, the restaurant was glowing, candles flickered, the booth by the window, the best seat in the house, was set with my mother's china. I waited, sipping lukewarm coffee, smiling at the familiar faces drifting in through the door. But none of them were mine. 6 o'clock came. Then 6:30. The staff avoided my gaze. Around 7, Marta, the head waitress, approached gently. Her voice was low. "Miss Margaret, the reservation was canceled an hour ago." I didn't blink, just nodded and looked down at my lap. My hands were trembling, but I folded them gently. No one else in the dining room noticed. That's the thing about pain. It can sit beside you like a quiet friend, unnoticed by others, whispering only to you. I excused myself, walked back to the kitchen, and sat on the stool where Ernest used to peel apples for pie. The crown was still there, the cake untouched. I reached over and blew out the candle, still burning, still waiting for a wish. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't even ask why. Because part of me already knew. Richard had grown tired of tradition. Perhaps Dana had other plans. Perhaps I no longer fit into their weekend calendar, squeezed between Pilates and brunch. I sat there for a long while, the buzz of the restaurant fading into a hum, and I thought of all the birthdays before, when Ernest would hang streamers, when Richard would run through the dining room with a balloon tied to his wrist, when family felt like something certain, like gravity. Now it felt more like weather, changing, unpredictable, and mostly out of my hands. But something else stirred quietly beneath the ache. Not anger, not quite. Just a small ember of knowing, of remembering who I was and what I had built. This restaurant wasn't just a place to eat. It was my story, my labor, my late nights, my legacy. And as I sat there, crown beside me, hands folded, I realized something Richard had forgotten. You can cancel a reservation, but you can't cancel the woman who owns the place. After that night, I told no one. Not the staff, not Ellie, not even my sister Joan, who calls every Tuesday without fail. Some things you don't speak aloud, not because you're ashamed, though I suppose a part of me was, but because saying it makes it more real. And I wasn't ready for that kind of real. I still opened the restaurant every morning. The bell above the door chimed the same. Coffee brewed like always, its smell filling every corner like a warm coat. But something had changed inside me. Not bitterness, just a quiet ache that stayed with me through the clatter of dishes and small-town chatter. Richard didn't call, not after the canceled birthday, not in the days that followed. I told myself maybe he'd forgotten, or felt guilty, or got caught up in work. But even those excuses rang hollow now. The next week, Marta came to me with a puzzled look. "Miss Margaret, the software update? For the new booking system? I thought it was your idea." I blinked. "What update?" She showed me the memo, emailed from Richard's account. He'd been added as an executive partner, a term I'd never used in my life. Apparently, he'd contacted the vendor directly, asked them to transition our old system into a more modern model, with him listed as the lead contact, without asking. I felt my mouth go dry. I nodded, thanked her, and went back to my office. The walls in there are lined with old photos, black and white shots of our opening day, Ernest flipping pancakes, me holding baby Richard in one arm and a ledger in the other. That boy used to nap under my desk while I filled out inventory slips, and now he was slipping me out of the picture, quietly, digitally, as if I wouldn't notice. But I noticed. A few days later, while cleaning the mail bin behind the counter, I found a glossy flyer folded in half, a rebranding proposal. Table 76, Modern Dining, Heritage Charm. There was a sleek new logo, a new menu concept, even a quote from Richard about honoring family while moving forward. There was no mention of me, not in the text, not in the photos, not even in the ownership listing at the bottom. I stood there, staring at the flyer as the phone rang and customers laughed at a nearby table. It was like watching yourself disappear in real time, not all at once, but in slow, careful erasures. Little omissions that, together, told a story where I no longer existed. I didn't say anything. I just tucked the flyer into my apron and went to refill a coffee pot. That weekend, Ellie came by, my sweet, soft-hearted granddaughter. She brought me tulips, my favorite, and told me about her biology exam. I poured her lemonade and watched the light catch her curls. Part of me wanted to ask her, "Did your father say anything?" But I didn't. I didn't want to put that burden on her. Instead, I just asked if she'd like to help roll silverware like old times. She smiled and said yes. As we worked, I noticed how she still folded the napkin edges with care, like I taught her. "Corners should kiss," I used to say, and she remembered. That did something to me, like a small light turning on inside a dim room. But the dimness returned quickly. The next Monday, I overheard a conversation in the back hallway. Two part-time servers, newer ones, were talking softly, not realizing I was nearby. One of them asked, "So, who's the old woman again? The owner's mom?" The other replied, "No clue. I think she just hangs around. Richard's the one running things now." I didn't interrupt. I just stepped back into the pantry and stood there for a long while, holding a jar of cinnamon that suddenly felt much too heavy. It's a strange thing, to be erased while you're still standing in the room. They weren't cruel, just unaware. And maybe that's worse. By the end of the week, my name was gone from the printed menus. The little note that used to say, "Founded with love by Margaret and Ernest, 1976, had been replaced by a sleek logo and a QR code. I took a menu home that night and stared at it under the kitchen light. Not out of anger, out of grief. Not the loud, crashing kind. Just the quiet kind that seeps in, like rain under a door. Still, I didn't say a word. I simply opened the drawer where I kept the original deed, the one Ernest and I signed in '76, with ink that had long since faded but a signature that still held weight. I laid the menu beside it and traced both with my fingers. They didn't match anymore, and that's when the thought first came, not fully formed, not loud, just a whisper. They think I've forgotten who I am, but I hadn't. Not yet. The breaking point didn't arrive like thunder. It came in the smallest of ways. A Tuesday morning, same as any other. I was wiping down the windows before opening. The sun was still low, casting soft shadows on the floor. I'd just finished refilling the sugar caddies when I heard them, Richard and Dana, standing by the register, not realizing I was already in the dining room. "She still comes in every day?" Dana asked, her voice sharp, clipped, the way it always was when she thought no one was listening. Richard sighed. "Yeah, it's like a habit she can't drop. But I mean, she's not really doing anything anymore, just floats around like a ghost." I didn't move. "She built it, sure," he added, quieter. "But that was decades ago. She can't run a place like this now. I'm just trying to modernize, make it sustainable. She'll thank me eventually." Dana scoffed. "She's 78, Richard. You're doing her a favor." They walked away after that, probably to the back office, where he'd installed his new laptop and replaced Ernest's old wooden desk with a modular one that looked like it belonged in a bank. I stood there, cloth in hand, heart tight inside my chest. "A ghost," he said. Maybe that's what I had become, floating, watching, unseen. I didn't confront them. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just stepped into the pantry, closed the door, and sat on the little stool where I used to rest between shifts. That space had always been my haven. The smell of spices, the coolness of the air. It brought back so many memories. Ernest laughing, Richard as a boy stacking soup cans, me humming while I filled out delivery forms. And now, it felt like a museum of a life that no longer fit the world outside its door. I sat there for a long while, listening to the sounds of my own restaurant growing fainter. Orders being taken, dishes clinking, my son's voice replacing mine. For the first time in all my years, I felt truly old. Not because of my body, but because I realized the people I loved no longer saw me as necessary. I had become decoration, sentimental, optional. I left early that day, told Marta I had a headache, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. At home, I made tea, I didn't drink, and sat by the window, watching a pair of sparrows build a nest in the eaves. They moved with such purpose, sticks in their beaks, feathers tucked into corners. No one told them they were too old to build. No one asked them to move aside for newer birds. And then something inside me cracked, not with fury, but with grief. Because that restaurant wasn't just where I worked, it was where I lived, where I loved, where I healed after Ernest died, where I raised my son when the world felt too big. And now he called me a ghost. In my own story. That night, I pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. It held the old menus, the first payroll ledger, the photo of Ernest in his apron, holding a tray of meatloaf with that crooked grin. Underneath it all was the deed. Our deed. Still signed in ink that had outlasted every update, every logo, every rebrand. I traced my name with a shaking finger. Margaret Eleanora Hughes, co-founder, co-owner, still living, still present. And in that quiet moment, I realized something so simple, it felt like a revelation. They might not see me, but I was still here, and I still had a voice. not a loud one, not the kind that thunders in rooms, but one that endures. The next morning, I wore my best cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons, and walked back into the restaurant, not as an old woman, but as the woman who built it. Marta greeted me with her usual warm smile. Feeling better? I nodded. And I was. Not healed. Not whole. But no longer invisible. Because that pantry, where I cried quietly the day before, still smelled like cinnamon and rosemary and memory. Because the deed still bore my name. Because my silence didn't mean surrender. I was Margaret. And they had forgotten. But I had not. I didn't speak of it. Not to Marta, not to Ellie, not even in my journal where I often scribbled little thoughts beside clipped recipes. But something inside me had shifted. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like the way light changes just before dawn. You wouldn't notice unless you'd been sitting in the dark a long time. That morning, instead of heading straight to the kitchen, I unlocked the drawer in the old office cabinet, one of the few things of Ernest's that Richard hadn't replaced yet. Inside, tucked between yellowed invoices and a brittle photo of our first week in business, was the original deed to the restaurant. I held it for a long time. The paper had softened with age, its corners curled like bread crust left too long on a counter, but the ink was still clear. Margaret and Ernest Hughes, co-owners and operators of E&M's table. It hit me then. They'd taken my name off menus, off flyers, even from conversations, it seemed, but not from this. I folded it gently and placed it into my handbag. Leather, scuffed, but still dignified. I walked the 3 blocks to the courthouse. It wasn't out of spite. I didn't feel angry, not even then. I felt ready. The woman at the counter was young, polite, and didn't recognize me. That was fine. I wasn't here to be remembered. I was here to be seen. I asked for a copy of our business incorporation forms. She retrieved it quickly, tapping at her computer, then printed it out and slid it across to me. My eyes scanned the names. Still there, still valid. Then I asked her quietly, "Can you tell me who's listed as the current primary owner?" She hesitated. "Well, unless a change was filed, it would be whoever was on the original papers." I nodded. "That would be me," I said softly. That night, at home, I made a small pot of tea, chamomile with honey, and opened a fresh sheet of paper. My hands trembled just a bit, but I pressed on. I began drafting a letter, not a confrontation, not a declaration of war, just a firm, quiet reminder. I wrote, "Dear Richard, I hope this note finds you well. I've noticed some changes around the restaurant, and while I appreciate innovation, I think it's important we both remember where and with whom it all began. Attached, you'll find a copy of the original deed and ownership documents, as well as a gentle request to pause any further rebranding or operational changes until we've had a proper discussion. I trust you understand the heart of this place because you grew up inside it. Let's talk soon. With care, Mom." I signed it, folded it, and placed it in an envelope along with the documents. I slid it into his mailbox early the next morning before sunrise. No fanfare, no expectations, just a truth, finally laid down. That day at the restaurant, I wore my apron again, not because I had to, but because I chose to. I helped Marta prepare the soup, reviewed the inventory order, and chatted with customers like I used to. It felt good, not because I was reclaiming power, but because I was remembering who I had always been. Around 3 o'clock, Ellie stopped by after school. She looked tired, her backpack slung low, eyes puffy from what I guessed were tears. "Rough day?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. She nodded and leaned into me, her small frame still fitting perfectly against mine, even now that she was nearly grown. "I failed a quiz, and Dad's been weird lately." I didn't ask for details. I just held her. After a moment, she looked up and asked, "Grandma, do you ever feel like people stop listening, even when you're right there?" I smiled gently and brushed her hair from her cheek. "All the time, sweetheart," I whispered. But that doesn't mean you stop speaking. You just speak softer, quieter, and you speak with your whole heart. She smiled at that, just a little, and I knew then that something was already changing. Maybe not out loud, maybe not fast, but quietly, deeply. The next week, I booked an appointment with our family lawyer, Mr. Halford. He's been retired for years now, but still takes occasional meetings, especially for old friends. He reviewed the documents carefully, nodding slowly. "You're still the primary," he said. "Legally and operationally, you're well within your rights to protect your role here." "I don't want to push him out," I told him. "I just want to be respected again, not erased." He gave a slow smile. "Then we'll make sure that's clear. We drafted a simple addendum, nothing forceful, just a reinforcement of my active role, my full ownership, and the requirement that any major decisions be reviewed with my written consent." I signed it. Halford sent a copy to Richard's work address. And then I went back to baking pies for the Sunday crowd. I didn't mention the letter. I didn't bring it up at dinner. I didn't wait for his reaction like a child waits for approval. Because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, and the quiet reclaiming of a space and a self. I'd nearly surrendered. In the days that followed, something softened in me, like the slow thaw of winter earth when spring tiptoes in, not with noise, but with quiet persistence. I didn't expect Richard to reply to the letter, and he didn't, not in words, not in messages, not even a nod when he passed through the restaurant's back door one Thursday afternoon. But I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement anymore. I was done waiting altogether. I began each morning the same: early coffee, gray light through the kitchen curtains, and a short walk to the restaurant with my handbag swinging beside me. But now, there was something else. Purpose. I didn't just walk in and observe. I participated. Quietly. Deliberately. I reviewed vendor contracts, some of which had been changed without my knowledge. I marked inconsistencies in pricing, scribbled notes in the margins, and scheduled a meeting with Marta and the new assistant manager Richard had hired without consulting me. His name was Jason, a nice young man, sharp tie, polite hands, but clearly overwhelmed. "I was told to follow the new systems," he explained as we sat in my office. Yes, my office, with sunlight washing over the old desk. "I didn't realize you were still active." I smiled. Not unkindly, just steady. I never stopped. He nodded, eyes lowering, respectful now in a way he hadn't been before. We walked through the new operations together. I made suggestions. Some he resisted, until I explained the reasons with soft confidence. Not every change was bad, but many had chipped away at what made the restaurant what it was. I reminded him, gently, that modernization without memory is just erasure. He listened. That was the beginning. Next, I asked Marta to return the printed menus, the ones with my name, Ernest's name. She blinked, surprised. "But I thought—" I shook my head. "We're not removing the past to make room for the future. We're making room with it." She smiled. "I'll find them." And she did. They were still in a storage bin, wrapped in old linen napkins, folded neatly, as if waiting for me to come back. By the weekend, we'd replaced the generic QR code menus with fresh prints, simple, elegant, and bearing our original names at the bottom. Founded with love by Margaret and Ernest Hughes, 1976. The reaction was immediate. Customers smiled. Old-timers patted my arm as they ordered pot roast. One woman teared up. "It feels like home again," she whispered. And I knew then, we hadn't just been losing paper and titles. We'd been losing soul. I began carving out a few hours each day to meet with the staff, not just to talk business, but to ask how they were feeling. The girl who folded napkins told me she missed the little glass candy dish I used to keep at the register. I found it in a drawer and filled it with peppermints the next day. Small things, gentle things, but they mattered. Word must have gotten around because one afternoon, Ellie showed up with a notebook and a shy smile. "Dad said I should come here if I wanted a more traditional perspective for my school project," she said, mimicking his voice with a little smirk. I handed her a slice of pie and sat across from her. "What's the project?" I asked. "Legacy," she replied, her voice small. "We have to interview someone about what it means." I looked at her then, not just as my granddaughter, but as a girl standing at the edge of her own story, wondering how it all begins. And I said, very softly, "Legacy is what you build with love and protect with grace." She wrote it down slowly, and I could see something new in her eyes. Pride, maybe, or belonging. That night, I stayed late after closing. I dusted the top shelf where we kept old photos, and I brought down the large frame we'd hidden away, the one of Ernest and me on our opening day. We were young in that photo, flushed with nerves, standing in front of a half-finished sign with smudged paint and big dreams. I cleaned the glass carefully and hung it back in its old place, right above the hostess station. The next morning, it caught the sunlight just right, as if it had been waiting. And I stood there, watching guests come through the door, heads turning, smiles blooming. Jason saw it too. He paused, nodded toward the photo, and said, "Looks like it belongs." "It always did," I replied. No fireworks, no speeches, just a quiet reckoning. I didn't reclaim the restaurant with shouts or threats. I reclaimed it with presence, by being there, every day, by touching what mattered, by remembering who I was and reminding others, not with force, but with dignity. And perhaps most importantly, by no longer asking for permission to belong to the thing I built with my own two hands. The reckoning stirred more than action. It stirred memory. Some wounds lie buried so deep, you forget they're still living under the skin. But when you begin to stand, truly stand, your roots shift, and sometimes they pull up pieces of the past with them. It happened quietly. I was in the stockroom, sorting through an old shelf of cookbooks when I found it. A small red binder. The corners were worn, and a bit of flour still dusted the cover. Inside were recipes written in Ernest's handwriting, pages yellowed and stained with time. I smiled at first, flipping through the notes, tracing the curve of his letters. Then I found it, tucked between two soup recipes. A photo I hadn't seen in decades. Richard, maybe 10 years old, sitting at the counter with a bowl of chili in front of him and tears on his cheeks. His face was red, eyes wide, and I remembered instantly what that day was. I had almost forgotten. But memory isn't always linear. It waits. He'd come home from school early, back when kids still rode their bikes in clumsy packs through neighborhoods. He was quiet that day, unusually so. I remember drying my hands and kneeling in front of him. "Did something happen, sweetheart?" He hesitated, then whispered, "They said we're poor." I blinked. "Who?" "Some kids. They said people who eat here every day must be poor, that we're poor too, 'cause we live behind a restaurant." I had pulled him into my arms and let him cry into my apron, and when he calmed, I made chili, his favorite, and told him the truth. "No, we're not poor," I said. "We're proud." I told him how we built this place, how his father and I had scraped and saved, how we poured ourselves into every meal, every handshake, every light bulb that flickered overhead. "But it's not shiny," he'd whispered, looking around. "No," I said, "it's not. But it's ours, and it's honest." He'd nodded then, slowly, spooning up the chili like he was tasting comfort, not just food. But something changed in him after that. I didn't see it right away, just little things. He started caring more about labels on clothes. He wanted shoes that matched the other kids. He stopped inviting friends over, started talking about getting out when he grew up. I encouraged him, of course. Told him he could be anything. I didn't want to hold him back. But somewhere along the way, his pride in this place turned into something else. Maybe shame. Maybe just the hunger for a life that looked different from ours. I never blamed him. Not then. But that photo, that moment, it stayed with me long after I put the binder away. Because now I see it clearly. That was the first crack. The first time he looked around and saw less while I was trying to teach him to see enough. And I wonder, even now, how many children have done that to their parents, mistaking humble for small, confusing, quiet strength with invisibility. Years later, when he brought Dana home, I noticed how stiff he became whenever we talked about the restaurant. He'd interrupt when I mentioned specials, change the subject when I talked about the staff. At the time, I thought he was just trying to impress her. But maybe he was still that 10-year-old boy, afraid of being seen as less than in someone else's eyes. I remember one Thanksgiving, they were newly married, and I had spent the entire day cooking. Roasted turkey, green bean casserole, the kind with the crispy onions on top. The table was full, the windows steamed up with warmth. Everyone was laughing. Then Dana asked, in that cool, curious voice of hers, "So when are you going to retire and let Richard take over?" I looked up, startled. "I mean," she added quickly, "it's time, right? You've had your run." No one said anything. I think even Richard looked uncomfortable. I laughed it off. "Well, maybe when I can no longer beat the dough for biscuits," I said. But I remembered that moment like a pin pressed into soft cloth, because underneath the smile, I felt it. The slow shifting of something I had always thought was permanent. That Thanksgiving, Richard left early, claiming work. I washed dishes alone that night, with only the ticking of the kitchen clock for company. It had begun long before the birthday dinner, before the flyers, before the menu changes. The wound had been there all along, covered with Sunday dinners and polite smiles and family photos with mismatched frames. But now I saw it clearly, and somehow seeing it didn't break me further, it steadied me. Because if that was the origin of his distancing, if it came from misunderstanding, from old childhood shame, then it was never really about me. It was about what he thought I was, what he feared I reminded him of. And I couldn't change that, but I could own my truth. I could stop apologizing for being the roots when someone else wanted only the leaves. And I could do it not with blame, but with love that no longer needed permission. It happened on a Friday morning, just after sunrise. I was sipping my tea at the kitchen table, the same seat I'd claimed for over 40 years, facing the window, watching the slow movement of the world waking up. The air was still cool, the light soft, and the house quiet in that familiar, comforting way. Until the knock came. It wasn't hurried, just one of those steady, professional taps you hear from people in suits. I opened the door and found a young man standing there, early 30s, well-dressed, holding a clipboard and a small envelope. "Mrs. Hughes," I nodded. "Apologies for the early visit. I'm here regarding the property at 211 Main Street, E&M's table." I stepped out onto the porch slowly, unsure what this was. My heart, without permission, began to thud louder. He handed me the envelope. "I've been contracted to conduct a preliminary assessment on behalf of the buyer." I blinked. "The buyer?" He looked confused. "Yes, ma'am. The property's been listed. The buyer requested a walkthrough before the offer is finalized." My throat tightened. "There must be a mistake," I said. "That building isn't for sale." His brows lifted slightly, kindly. "I was told the sale was already in motion. Owner approval already signed." I stared at him, the words like a slow tide rising in my ears. Owner approval. Already signed. I'm the owner," I said softly. "And I haven't signed anything." Now he blinked, uncomfortable. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Hughes. Perhaps there's been a clerical mix-up. I can double-check with the agency." He left quietly, saying he'd follow up, that he didn't mean to alarm me. But the envelope in my hand burned like it held a match. I sat down right there on the porch and opened it. Inside were listing documents, a listing price, agency notes, and a signature. Richards. In the section labeled Authorized Seller, no co-signature from me, no consent, no mention of my name at all, just his, as if I had never existed, as if the place I bled into, the place I breathed into life, belonged only to him now. The betrayal didn't scream, it settled like dust, slow, dry, suffocating. I didn't cry, not then. I just folded the papers back into the envelope and placed it on the table beside the salt shaker. I stared at it for a long time, my tea growing cold beside me, until the sun lifted fully into the sky. I walked to the restaurant with legs that didn't feel like mine. Each step was soft, measured, like walking through a dream you're desperate to wake from. The staff greeted me kindly, unaware. I moved through the dining room like a shadow. The air felt different now, the walls I had once painted, the floors Ernest had sealed by hand, the old booth by the window where Richard once learned to spell meatloaf on a napkin. And now, my son was selling it, not just without me, against me. I stepped into the back office, his new office with the cold desk and impersonal decor, and sat in the chair he'd picked out without asking. I looked around. Everything had been scrubbed of warmth. The curtains were gone. The calendar no longer had staff birthdays written in pen. It felt like a room built to erase history. And suddenly, something in me broke. Not loudly, just quietly. Like a thread finally pulled from a worn cloth, unraveling in silence. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the copy of the deed I always carried now. I laid it on the desk, right on top of his laptop. Then I reached into the drawer, found a stack of the new business cards, sleek, sharp, soulless, and slowly tore one in half. Just one. A small act. But somehow it steadied me. That evening, I sat in the pantry again, my little haven, my quiet corner. I let the weight of what had happened settle on my shoulders. My own son had tried to sell the restaurant I built, behind my back, without my name, without a word. And I realized it wasn't just oversight, it was erasure, deliberate, calculated, complete. This was the moment people write about, the one that divides time into before and after, the one that tells you, this is who they are now, and this is who I must become. Not angry, not loud, but resolute. The next morning, I called Mr. Halford. He answered on the second ring. "I need to protect what's mine," I said softly, and he said, "I'll meet you at noon." I hung up and stood at the window, watching the sparrows in the eaves again, and I whispered to no one but myself. He forgot who he was dealing with, because I wasn't just his mother. I was Margaret Eleanora Hughes, and I still owned the key. I didn't storm into the restaurant that day. I didn't call Richard or march into his office or demand to know how he could do such a thing. I just showed up, the same way I always had, early, steady, present. But something had changed, not in the way I moved, but in what I carried within me. There was a silence to me now, not empty, but full, like the stillness of a church before a prayer. At noon sharp, Mr. Halford arrived. He walked through the front door like an old friend, wearing his same brown wool coat, the same kind of briefcase he used to carry back when Ernest was alive. We didn't meet in Richard's office. I brought him to the little table near the kitchen, the one with the lace runner and a chipped sugar bowl that no one had the heart to throw away. He laid out the paperwork. Quietly, carefully, no drama, just truth. A cease and desist letter, a formal notification of my sole legal authority over the property, and an addendum reinstating me as full operator of the business, irrefutable, irrevocable, lawful. "I'll file it this afternoon," he said gently. "He won't be able to proceed." I nodded. Not out of victory, just closure. That evening, I stayed behind after the last customer had gone. The lights were dimmed, the chairs turned upside down on tables, the hush of nighttime returning to the walls. I walked slowly to Richard's office. I placed the new paperwork on his desk, neatly stacked, with a copy of the original deed resting on top. No note, no instructions, just presence. I removed the photo of him and Dana that had replaced the old family portrait. Not with bitterness, just intention. I wrapped it in soft cloth and left it on the couch near the door. Then I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the framed photo of Ernest and me, the one he had tucked away months ago. I dusted it off, held it for a moment, and returned it to the front of the restaurant. right beside the register, where it belonged. From that day forward, I stopped just being there. I took back my place. Quietly, deliberately. I resumed reviewing all invoices. I scheduled weekly staff meetings, ones I led myself. I reinstated our family meal tradition on Sundays, where staff could sit and eat together before the lunch rush. No phones, no hierarchy, just stories and warm food. They welcomed it. They welcomed me. Marta smiled more. Jason loosened up. Even the youngest waitress, who barely knew my name when she started, began calling me Miss M with affection. And still, no word from Richard. For 2 weeks, he didn't come in. Not once. The silence was louder than words, but I didn't let it in. I was done making space for absence. Ellie came by after school one afternoon, breathless with news about her college applications, her dreams of studying culinary history. She told me she wanted to understand more about the recipes we used, where they came from, how they changed through the years. We spent the afternoon going through my old notebooks, crumb-smeared, tear-stained, handwritten in the margins with memories. She asked questions. She listened. She made me feel like a tree whose roots were finally being recognized, not just stepped over. As we sifted through the pages, she paused and looked at me, serious. "Does Dad know you're still running everything?" I met her gaze and answered honestly. "He will." She didn't press, just nodded. Later that week, I made another quiet change. I had the signage outside repainted, not the name, not the branding, just one line added beneath. Owned and operated by Margaret E. Hughes since 1976. It was small, elegant, subtle, but it said everything. The regulars noticed first. "That's more like it," Mr. Bailey chuckled, tipping his cap as he walked in. Others smiled, nodded, whispered their approval like a shared secret. And still, no word from Richard. I stopped checking my phone, stopped waiting, because I had remembered something vital. My worth was not determined by their recognition of it. My belonging did not require their invitation. And my legacy? It didn't need to be handed over. It needed to be lived. Every morning, I opened the doors. Every night, I turned off the lights. And in the quiet hours between, I stitched myself back into the seams of the place I had built, not as an ornament or memory, but as its living heart. Not one word spoken in confrontation, not one battle fought in the open. Only soft steps, quiet shifts, and the gentle reclaiming of a woman long mistaken for a ghost. I thought I was alone in this quiet unfolding, and truth be told, I had made peace with it. There's a certain strength that comes with letting go of needing to be understood. You move more freely, you breathe more deeply. But sometimes life sends you a soft echo in return, something that says, "I see you. I haven't forgotten." It came on a Tuesday, tucked inside a manila envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was familiar, small, careful, tilted slightly to the left. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, along with a photograph. The letter was from Ellie. Not a quick note, not a school project. A letter. Long, thoughtful, handwritten in blue ink. "Dear Grandma, I found this photo in one of Dad's old boxes. It was behind a stack of yearbooks. I don't think he even remembers it's there. But I do. I remember that day. I was maybe 5. You had let me play with flour on the counter, and I made a mess. Dad was upset, but you just laughed. You let me knead the dough, even though it turned into a lump. You called it Ellie's biscuit, and you served it to me on a special plate. I thought I was the most important person in the world. I guess what I'm trying to say is, you made things feel important. You made me feel important. Even in small ways. Especially in small ways. I've been watching everything that's happened lately. I know you've been hurt. I know Dad's been different. But I see you. I see how much this place means to you. I see how much you've carried without asking anyone for help. So if you'll let me, I'd like to carry some of it with you. My hands trembled as I read those words, the edges of the paper softening beneath my fingers. The photograph was of the two of us, me in my apron, flour on my arms, Ellie on a stool beside me with dough all over her little hands. We were both laughing. I had forgotten that picture even existed, but she hadn't. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not validation, just joined. Not all love leaves. Some of it returns in new shapes. The next day, she showed up at the restaurant after school, notebook in hand, eyes determined. "I want to learn," she said simply. "The whole place. Recipes, books, staff names, everything." We started that day. I taught her how to tell when a biscuit was done just by listening to its crust crack. How to balance vinegar in stew. How to write schedules that gave the single mothers the mornings off. She soaked it in, not for credit, not for recognition, but because she cared, because she understood. One evening, as we locked up, I handed her a small brass key. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. "The front door," I said. "Ernest gave me this on our first day. It's yours now, too." She didn't cry. She just took it in both hands and said, "Thank you." A week later, she organized a memory night. She printed old menus, framed photos of long-gone staff, played soft music from the 70s. Regulars came in dressed like it was 1980. One of them brought a paper clipping from our first-ever review. They shared stories, laughed at old prices, passed around biscuits as if they were holy bread. And I stood at the back, watching Ellie move through the crowd, confident, kind, listening. She hadn't just stepped into the restaurant, she'd stepped into the heart of it. That night, she stayed to help me close. We turned off lights, wiped down counters, stacked chairs. As I reached to lock the front door, she stopped me. "Grandma," she said, "you know he's going to come back." I didn't turn around. "I know." "What will you say?" I thought for a long time. Then I said, "Nothing more than I have to, and only once." She nodded, not in fear, but in knowing. Because now I wasn't standing alone, and that changed everything. The power I'd been waiting to find, it was never lost. It had only gone quiet, like a garden in winter, roots alive beneath the frozen soil, waiting for one sign of spring. Ellie was that sign. Not because she rescued me, but because she remembered me, because she saw what had always been there, and in doing so, helped me see it again, too. The first ripple came with the mail, a letter addressed not to me, but to the Office of Ownership, E&M's table. Generic, formal, nervous handwriting. Inside, it was from the real estate agency. "We apologize for the miscommunication regarding the sale of the property at 211 Main Street. Upon recent legal clarification, the attempted listing has been formally withdrawn. We recognize your rights as the sole and active proprietor." No apology from Richard, just red tape retreating under the pressure of truth. I folded the letter neatly and filed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't need it to prove anything anymore. The restaurant stood as proof enough, but truth has a way of spreading quietly, like smoke through walls. Within a week, word had reached the staff, though I never said a word. They noticed Richard's name disappearing from memos. They noticed my handwriting back on the rota. They noticed the photo of Ernest and me returned to the hostess stand, its frame polished and upright. Jason, young, respectful, came to me one morning with downcast eyes. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I looked at him, steady. "I know." He nodded, relief washing over his face like rain. 2 days later, Richard showed up. It was a Saturday morning, the breakfast rush still buzzing. The door jingled like always, but something in the air changed when he walked in. He looked out of place, standing in his pressed shirt, no coat despite the chill, like he'd left in a hurry and hadn't thought it all through. He glanced around the room, taking in the full tables, the smell of cinnamon and bacon, the chatter, the life of the place. Then his eyes found me. I was at the counter, sleeves rolled, butter on my fingers. I didn't move toward him. He hesitated. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, unsure if he was welcome. But he came closer, step by step. "Mom," he said. I looked up, nodded. "Can we talk?" I paused, wiped my hands, not because I was flustered, but because I wanted that small moment to matter. Without speaking, I led him to the corner booth, the one where he used to eat pancakes shaped like animals. He sat down, stiff, silent. "I got your letter," he said after a moment. "From the lawyer." I nodded. "I didn't realize—" His voice trailed. I waited. "I thought you'd stepped back. I thought it was time." Still, I said nothing. "I didn't mean to go behind your back. Dana thought it was the right move. Cleaner, more efficient." I looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't see a son. I saw a man who had forgotten his own roots. I spoke gently. "You didn't ask. You assumed. And in doing so, you tried to erase me." He looked down. "I didn't want to erase you," he said, quieter now. "I just thought maybe it would be easier." "Easier for whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. Outside the window, a child laughed. Someone dropped a fork. Life went on. "You're always welcome here," I said, folding my napkin slowly. "But you don't get to decide who I am. Not here, not anywhere." He swallowed hard, nodded. We sat for a moment more, silence hanging soft between us, not angry, just final. Then he stood. "I'll step back," he said, "if that's what you want." "It's not about what I want," I replied. "It's about what's right." He looked at me, as if searching for something he hadn't seen in years. Then quietly, he left. No slamming, no tears. Just the sound of the bell above the door, swinging once. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. And yet, the restaurant? It grew brighter, the regulars noticed. "You look lighter," one said. I just smiled. The shift wasn't just in me. It was in the walls. In the way the staff greeted each other. In the way Ellie whistled while stacking napkins. In the way Marta hung an old apron of mine on a hook in the kitchen, like a flag being returned to its rightful pole. I didn't make speeches. I didn't celebrate. But every morning I opened the door with my own hand. And every night I turned off the lights knowing that nothing had been taken from me that I hadn't quietly reclaimed. Not revenge, just restoration. And it was enough. It was nearly a month before I saw Richard again. Not in the restaurant, not at my door, but in the grocery store, of all places, between the frozen peas and the shelf of canned soup. I was reaching for a box of barley when I felt someone stop beside me. That familiar, tall shadow. I didn't have to look. "Mom." His voice was softer than I remembered, a little unsteady. I turned toward him, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. They were tired, not from work, but from knowing. "I wasn't sure you'd speak to me," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd try," I replied. He gave a small bitter smile and looked down at his shoes. "I've been thinking about everything, about how I handled it, about you." I waited. I got so focused on making things better, I didn't realize I was building something that didn't need fixing. The grocery store lights hummed above us. "You didn't see it," I said quietly, "because you stopped looking." He nodded, swallowing. "I used to be proud of it, proud of you, the story, the place. But somewhere along the way, I let other people, Dana, the board, my colleagues, convince me it was just sentimental, just old." I looked at him, this grown man in a wool coat, once the boy who tied aprons around his waist and stirred chili with both hands. "It is old," I said softly. "But not everything that's old is outdated. Some things just need to be held with both hands." He closed his eyes for a moment. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." He nodded. "I've stepped down from the business account," he added, almost like an offering. "Removed my access. Told the agency to take my name off everything." "That's a start," I said. He looked at me again. brows furrowed like he was searching for some softer place to land. I don't know how to fix this. I shook my head, not unkindly. It's not something you fix, it's something you acknowledge, and then you don't repeat it. He didn't answer right away. Then, almost like a child, he asked, "Can I come back? Not to run things, just to be part of it again?" I thought about that. Not long. "I think," I said gently, "you need to come back in through the front door this time. Not the back office, not the spreadsheets, the front door. Sit at a table, taste the biscuits. Watch what it means to belong to something instead of controlling it." His face changed then, not with shame, but with humility. That rare, raw kind that only comes after everything else has been stripped away. He nodded. "Okay." We stood there for a moment longer, two people in the middle of frozen foods and second chances. Then I placed the barley into my cart and said, "I'm making stew tonight, if you want some." "I'd like that." He reached for a bag of carrots and handed them to me the way he did when he was little, eager to help, unsure how. That evening, he came to the restaurant just as the sun was dipping low behind the church spire. He didn't go into the office. He didn't talk business. He sat at a table in the corner, ordered the meatloaf special, and ate every bite. When Ellie brought him the check, he slipped a note under the plate. Later, when I cleared the table, I found it. Just a single line on a napkin. "Thank you for letting me walk back through the right door." I folded it and placed it in the drawer beside Ernest's apron. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because this wasn't about making him feel forgiven. It was about finally standing in the full truth of myself and asking nothing more than to be seen as I truly am, and being willing at last to be seen without shrinking. No raised voices, no final warnings, just boundaries drawn in quiet soil, and peace blooming there, at last. Spring came slowly that year, as if the season itself had been watching, waiting for the right time to step forward. The daffodils outside the restaurant poked through the soil one morning, shy and yellow. I took it as a sign. Inside, the walls breathed differently. There was light again, not just from the sun, but from something warmer, deeper. The air smelled of cinnamon and old joy. We had just finished repainting the kitchen, same cream color Ernest had chosen decades ago. Ellie helped with the corners, humming while she worked, a smudge of paint on her chin that she didn't bother wiping off. The front sign, too, had changed. It still read E&M's Table, still bore our founding year. But now, beneath it, a soft line of gold paint said, "A place for belonging, then and now." Ellie's idea. She'd taken over the social pages, started posting pictures of regulars, photos of our old recipe cards. Customers loved it. Young folks came in curious, old ones came back nostalgic. But most of all, the restaurant felt like it had remembered who it was. One Tuesday afternoon, the dining room was nearly empty, the lull between lunch and supper, and I was folding napkins at the front counter. Ellie was organizing the register, and Marta had stepped out to fetch ice. Richard walked in. He didn't rush, didn't bring papers, just a small gift bag in one hand and something softer in his expression than I'd seen in a long while. "Smells like Grandma's stew," he said. "It is," I replied, not turning around fully. "You're just in time." He approached slowly, set the bag on the counter. "It's not much," he said. "Just something I found that I thought belonged here." I opened it. Inside was a small frame, a copy of the very first health permit we were issued in 1976. Still crisp, still bearing Ernest's and my names. I had forgotten all about it. I looked up, and Richard was watching, not with guilt, but with a quiet hopefulness, the kind you don't speak aloud in case it scares itself away. "I'd like to come by sometimes," he said. "Help in the kitchen, learn some of the recipes, not to run anything, just to be part of it again." I considered, then I nodded once. "Come on Tuesdays. That's when we prep biscuits for the week." He smiled. "I remember." And just like that, something unspoken passed between us, Not complete healing, not perfection, but beginning. Later that day, I stood by the front window, tea in hand, watching Ellie chat with a new server. She was showing her how to wrap cutlery just right, tight, but not too tight. "Let the corners kiss," I heard her say, the same words I'd once taught her, now being passed forward. Behind me, Richard was peeling carrots, not fast, not efficient, just steady, learning. And I realized then, this was my legacy, not the walls, not the building, but the spirit, the way the place held people, the way it remembered them. I used to think legacy was what you left behind, but I see now. It's what you stand in while you're still here. It's the warmth you protect, so others have somewhere to come home to. That evening, I took the old paper crown from the kitchen drawer, the one I hadn't touched since that birthday. I set it gently on the prep counter, not as a symbol of shame, but as a reminder of how far I had come. From forgotten to remembered, from background to backbone. I wore it for just a moment, smiled, then placed it on the counter, beside the biscuit tin, and walked back into the kitchen where the ones who knew were waiting. The door chimed open again, and life, in all its quiet grace, kept going. Sometimes I still sit by the front window in the early hours before the town stirs. I sip my tea from the same chipped mug Ernest used, the one with the faded red rooster on the side. I watch the steam curl and drift, and I think about everything that's come and gone, people, seasons, sorrows, joy. I think about what it means to belong, not just to a place, but to yourself. For a long time, I measured my worth in what others remembered about me. In how often they called, how quickly they said thank you, how loudly they praised the things I made. But I see it clearer now. Belonging doesn't come from being needed. It comes from standing quietly, fully, in the truth of who you are, even when no one's clapping. This restaurant, this home, this life, they were never meant to impress. They were meant to hold. And now, they do. Not just for me, but for Ellie. For Richard even. For the young waitress who lost her mother last year and finds comfort in our kitchen. For the man who eats here alone every Thursday because it reminds him of his wife. This place, this legacy, it remembers. And so do I. So if you've ever felt erased, if you've ever sat at your own table and wondered when the noise of others drowned out your own name, I want you to know something. You are not forgotten. You are not small. You are not past your moment. You are still the center of something sacred. And no one, not even those you love, can take that away. If you've ever felt unseen or forgotten, remember, your worth doesn't depend on their understanding. Share your story in the comments. I'll be reading, quietly, steadily, just like always.